Welcome to the Clangers Pod. This is where three old road testers and serial crap car collectors witter on about cars from the late 1990s and early 2000s, the models which are stuck between being classics and bangers. They are the Clangers. I'm Tom Barnard.
I'm Mike Askew.
And I'm Craig Cheetham.
A quick recap in case you haven't listened to any of the first episodes. We all worked together on Auto Express magazine in the late 90s, early 2000s. And that means we drove pretty much every new car that was launched during that period. And we've got a lot of stories to tell. Now, before we make a start, do you want a business update? You seem to enjoy it all last time.
Yeah, okay. What were we last time?
We were
New Zealand
228th in New Zealand.
We were 229th, actually.
229th.
Yeah.
Well, you'd be pleased to know that we've gone up in the rankings since then. We've done very well. I'll give you the highlights, though, before we sort of get into that. We are 6th in Romania, which is good, isn't it? 18th in the UK, but I only put it out yesterday, so it may go up further.
That's not
but we've still got work to do because we're 235th in Canada. We need to find some Canada angles for the next one.
Okay, well, maybe they'll like the cars we've got this week. So we're going to be talking about two small cars which were big successes. So there was BMW's reborn Mini and the Mk6 Fiesta. We also want to talk about how in one of them Craig had to drive 3,500 miles in a week and Mike had to forge his hotel bills.
I did indeed. But as always, we'll start off by finding what Craig has bought / or sold this week.
What's Craig bought this week so far?
Well, I didn't want to let the side down. As you'll remember last week that I mentioned that I bought an MGF at auction. Yes. And was expecting it to be slightly broken because it was in the head gasket danger zone and had some L plates in the boot. I'm very pleased to report it turned up on Thursday and the head gasket is fine. It was replaced 10,000 miles ago by a very well-known MG specialist. And the L plates don't appear to have affected the clutch whatsoever. So I've actually looked in and got a really, really nice MGF for not a lot of dollar. So, yeah. The aim next with that one is to sell it to Tom and make some decent money.
It's inevitable.
Yeah. And then, obviously, I did mention that when I bought the MGF, it was by complete accident because I was looking for a cheap diesel runabout to get me through the winter months. And about 5 hours after we came off air last time we recorded the pod, I had a phone call from a guy I know very well. He's a scrap dealer who takes vehicles from a local car dealer who doesn't want to retail anything that's not worth retailing because the mileage is too high or it's too old. And the irony being, after last week's pod, I've ended up with a Jaguar X-Type Estate. 2-litre diesel, perfect for my winter hackery. It's gold, very, very gold, with beige leather interior. So definitely a certain demographic would apply to the person who bought that new. I'd imagine they're quite a bit older than I am, but you know what? I'll just embrace it because it's got heated seats, it does 50 miles to the gallon, and it goes all right.
How many X-Types have you now got? What's your collection at now?
I've got 3 at present. Yeah, so I've got my old one back, my silver one, which is having the sills welded, and I popped into the garage yesterday to see how they were getting on, and they had 2 X-Types up in the air on neighbouring ramps because they said it's easier to weld 2 at once because while they're welding in a section on one sill, they can allow it to cool down, weld the other X-Type, and then go back and finish off the first one. And it saves them time and it saves them welding equipment. So they had 2 matching X-Types on neighbouring ramps and one guy with a MIG welder dealing with both of them. It's quite amusing, really. And then the other one I've got is the Indianapolis Special Edition, which I think I've mentioned on here before.
Do you think that the welding bloke does Honda Jazzes one day and X-Types the next day?
I think he probably has a sort of process. So the Honda Jazzers, X-Types, Ford Focuses, because they're very, very common these days in terms of needing welding. And then he probably has a special 2-day session set apart for Land Rovers.
I also noticed on social media that the chap who bought your 206 in exchange for your other X-Type seems to put it up for sale again. Was it not to his liking, do you think?
I expect he probably had to throw his shoes in the bin and thought, no, it's not for me.
Now, talking of gold cars, we've got another story about that in the Mini section of our two special cars this week. But I think we're going to start with the Mark 6 Fiesta, if that's all
Mm,
right with you two. So
Yes.
this is the one. It's a bit confusing because it's the one that went from 2002 to 2008. Now, it was really only called the Mark 6 in the UK. In other places, it's called the Mark 5 because there was the Mark 4 facelift. So if you remember, the Mark 4 was the one that had lots of bits from the Mark 3 Fiesta, but then it had that strange sort of comedy frog mouth on it, and it
mm.
was a Mazda 121 as well, and introduced a 1.25 engine, was generally great. And then they put another front end on that that always looks slightly surprised. We think that's the Mark 5, but in other countries they don't. So, but the one after that was an all new car, Mark 6, and that's the one we're talking about today. So, it came out in 2002. Um, I I always thought that generation was a bit bland. It was odd because everything else Ford was making at that time was great. There was the Ka and there was the Focus, Puma. They were all brilliant. And then they sort of had this slightly boring phase where they thought they'd come out with this Mark 6 Fiesta, which was a bit boring looking, I thought, and then the Fusion, which was based on it, that were all a bit strange and dreary.
I'll tell you what would have made you think it wasn't dull, and that would have been if you'd have done the job that I did on the way to the. I think there was a design reveal towards the end of 2001 over at Ford in Dunton, and our plan at Auto Express was to get every generation of Fiesta together for a cover shoot. And we had Ford's own heritage cars, which were a Mark 1 and Mark 2, but nothing else was old enough to be interesting enough for them to keep on their heritage fleet. So we had to find a Mark 3, and my friend Tim had one. So I think I did a thing whereby the Ford press garage lent him a new Focus for 3 days so that I could borrow his Fiesta Mark 3 to drive it down to Essex. And it was an H-Reg with the a 1.1 CVH engine in it. And if you thought that the 2002 Fiesta was dull, uh, compared with a 1991 Mark 3 Fiesta with a CVH engine, it was brilliant.
Here's a geeky fact for you. That Mark 3 Fiesta, do you remember the steels on it? If you had
Mm,
the base model, they were they had little arrows on them and they went round. Do you remember those?
mm.
Yeah.
Little triangles. I own a Mark 1 Ford Cat, and if you pull off the hubcaps on that, it's got those wheels underneath. So they were, that's how they save the cost. Like, what have we got in the parts bin? That'll do. We'll put them on there.
Do you remember, or was it just me? When I was a teenager, I remember seeing the Mark 3 Fiestas as new cars, and
Mm.
they always seemed to have slightly pinkish brake lights. Every other car had
Mm.
bright red, and Mark 3 Fiestas were a bit pink. Is that just
Yeah.
me?
That was just you.
So
Mm.
it wasn't any wonder, really, that last week when we were trying to suggest doing this car for the podcast, none of us actually knew what mark it was. We at least have a slight get out there in some factors. We
Mm.
know it as the Mark 6 in the UK, but the rest of the world
Hmm.
knew it
Mm.
as the Mark 5. I've got something to throw into the mix here, and that is that for our Antipodean listeners, if we have any, which the figures suggest we might have one or two now. The Mark 6 was the first Fiesta that was sold as Fiesta there, according to my sources. But before it, there was the car called a Ford Festiva. Are you familiar with
Mm.
that?
It wasn't the festival,
It,
the Kia Pride, basically.
yeah, it's a glorious
Yeah.
workaround. And so much as Mazda designed it, Kia had the rights to build it, and then Ford put a Ford badge on it. So that is a proper kind of mix, isn't
Mm.
it?
There
That's
was
a
a
real.
bigger collaboration as well. I'm not 100% sure it was the Kia Avella in certain markets, and I can't remember what it was sold as a Ford. It might have been a Tracer or a Meteor,
Mm.
but it was like the next size up. So it wasn't quite as big as an Escort, um, and somehow managed to be even more dull than an Escort. So yeah, it was quite an impressive thing. I hired one in Malta, and quite possibly the worst car I've ever driven.
That's some accolade for
It
you.
is,
Mm.
yes.
And talking of Craig's accolades, I think the Mark 6 Fiesta had your silliest job ever at Auto
Ooh.
Express, didn't it, Craig?
Yeah, I can't remember who was responsible for me doing this, but I think it might have been a collaboration between the road test editor and the motoring editor,
Yeah.
who are you two. And Back at the time, well, back in the end of 2001, the new Polo had come out, and the Fiesta was about to be launched in the UK. So there was an international press launch for both cars. And car manufacturers speak to each other to make sure that journalists don't get to mischief. And they decided that what they would do, because they were launching the cars the same week, they would launch uh, the Ford Fiesta would be launched in Estepona on the Costa del Sol,
Yeah.
and the Volkswagen Polo would be launched in Hamburg. So coast to coast, as far as you could possibly go in mainland Europe. Nobody would be foolish enough to do it. Nobody would have time to do it. But we did. And I seem to recall Tom was the one that brokered the deal with our sister title, Auto Build, in Germany, to blag a Volkswagen Polo for a little bit longer than the standard 2 days, saying they wanted to do some, extended testing with it. And we got the car from their HQ in Hamburg. I flew out there with my friend Matt, who I know listens to this podcast. So, Matt Hesketh, hello. I was dispatched to drive the Polo from Hamburg to Estepona, and I think we had 72 hours to get there, and slightly
Plenty of
less than
time.
that to get back. To spend an hour on a wet beach with Mike and Nathan, who was the Auto Express staff photographer at the time. On the final day, the first leg of the journey, I should say, just as we were rolling into the Costa del Sol, it's about 10 o'clock at night, and felt a horrible bump in the road. And we'd gone over a dead animal of some sort, and it had put a puncture, well, basically blown out the near side rear tyre. So my job, first thing on this, whatever it was, a Tuesday morning somewhere in a random part of Spain, was to go and find a new tyre. And the only place I could find that was open early enough to get to the photo shoot was this under the arches dodgy garage. And the only tyre he had in stock, as the correct size for the Polo, was a cheap remold. I think it cost about 25 euros. So we flung it on for the photos. I drove down to the beach. We did what we had to do, and then we drove back to Germany, which makes it all sound so trivial. The photo shoot overran a little bit. It put us a bit behind on the return leg because we wanted to be in northern Spain by nightfall. So we were rattling along a little bit too quickly through the Sierra Nevada. I came over the crest of a hill, and in front of me was a Guardia Civil car with the blue lights on top, and I'd overtaken an unmarked police car. He'd radioed his mate up the road, and they pulled us over. I can tell you, as a result of this, that the top speed of a Volkswagen Polo 1.2, complete VMAX on a level road, is 166 kilometers per hour, which is about 102 miles per hour. That was what appeared on the speeding ticket anyway, and we were driven to the nearest town. They took our passports off us, drove us to the nearest town, took me to the cash machine. I drew out about 150 quid, equivalent thereof, gave them the money, and the two traffic cops ripped up the ticket and stuck the money in their pocket. So I had no evidence of handing this money over, and obviously, thankfully, Mike took a little bit of pity on me when I got back to Auto Express and put my expenses claim in. I had to explain that I'd paid the speeding fine in cash and had no record or evidence of a receipt. So Mike very kindly knocked up a receipt from the Hotel de Velocidad. Any of you speak Spanish, you know what that means. Speed Hotel, and it went in my expenses claim. And well, let's say no more, shall we?
I think we're beyond the statute of limitations, aren't we? The 6
I
years,
think
isn't
so.
it?
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to come after that. But yeah, you make it sound like you had a gun to your head when we were telling you to do this, asking you to do this, Craig. You couldn't have been more excited.
What won the twin test, though? What was better, the Polo or the Fiesta?
The Fiesta one. So can you imagine how seething for Volkswagen must have been? Not only get their car back with a ropey tyre and 10,000 clicks on the clock, but to then come second.
I also seem to remember that Ford had helpfully assembled some of the rivals there as well. There was no Polo, so we were there. You were exclusive with that. But I remember that they bought a load of other cars that we was up against. Obviously, whipping boys, things like the Punto and whatever, which they knew they could comfortably beat. They didn't have anything good there. But yeah, it was one of those things. We had to do this thing that was more than just going to be a single test. It was going to be a group test. So yeah. But
Personally, I'd have a Punto over a Fiesta. They're far more interesting.
This is you, though, Craig. This isn't the great the people that actually buy cars new, I suppose. But there we go. But what an adventure, Craig! And did we send you on any other ones after that? I don't think we did. Didn't you?
Nothing
You were
could
sort of.
compare to that. I mean, there were a few, but nothing could compare to that particular pan-European adventure.
People don't do that anymore, do they? I mean, those are the days when we had a bit of budget on magazines that you would often go to drive into Europe with another car as a competitor for a twin. I don't think you do that anymore. It's too much like hard work, and it's too expensive as well to do. But,
It was a lot of fun back then, wasn't it? It was.
It was. Craig, Mark 6 Fiestas. You've had a few, I presume, by now.
Mark 6s? No, the back axles fall out. I don't want one of those.
Well, that was leading to my next question. What goes wrong? Obviously, they are so bad that not even you have them on your collection of things.
If you go onto Google and type in Ford Fiesta Mark 6 rear axle fail, you see various quite amusing photographs of Fiestas with their axle 100 meters behind them in the middle of the road, and they just fall off at the rear suspension mounts.
They rust somewhere where you can't see, so the MOT tester doesn't see it. No one sees it because it's all happening under some plastic cover or something. And then one day you just go around the corner and plump, normally to some sort of young, inexperienced driver, because that's who Fiestas tend to appeal to, and they tend to get quite upset.
The guy who does my MOTs, the chap who's been welding up the X-types, he told me that he advises every single one because you can't see the area where they corrode. And he says, well, as an MOT tester, I'm covering myself by saying plastic covers fitted on underside of vehicle, because the inspector's only allowed to inspect what he can see. That's the first rule of the MOT manual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know. That's why my Smart virtually fell apart, because it's all held under plastic tray. There's a huge plastic tray that goes underneath the Smart. And he couldn't take it off, and I didn't want to take it off. But it turns out I did take it off when I replaced the handbrake cable on it, and it was absolutely rotten under there. It was just like falling apart, and that's why I had to scrap it in the end. But from the outside, it looked absolutely fine.
I wonder if you had, for example, a Jaguar X-Type with its rotten sills, if you were to attach a tarpaulin to the bottom of the car and run it from one side to the other and drop it into the garage, would you pass your MOT?
I think it has to be a sort of factory fitted part. I don't think you can just drive up with it, covering it in gaffer tape and then say it's a cover. No, I think it has to be an official part. But you would know better than I would, Craig. So.
I think those days are past. To be honest, it's not like the days when I was a kid, where my neighbour knocked on my door on a weekday evening in a bit of panic, asking if I had any plasticine. Bearing in mind I was about 8 at the time. Because he needed to get his MGB through the MOT the following day, and he just poked a hole in it. So he was going to bung it full of plasticine and then slap some black hammerite over the top. And sure enough, he did. He got through the MOT, and he bought me some chocolate as a thank you.
Oh, there we go. That's nice, isn't it? Yeah. So are we going to consider the Mark 6 Fiesta as a true clanger? I think I'm going to try and introduce this every week, as we decide whether it's worthy of being in the Clangers Hall of Fame. Or do we think it's?
I think it's a bit of an odd one, isn't it? Because there weren't really many performance versions. There was an ST, wasn't there?
And there was some, which is quite cool. Actually, do you remember? This has just come back to me. This is another brilliant Auto Express moment. The ST150, when it first came out, we had one of the first cars in the country at Rockingham Motor Speedway. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. And Ford, to make sure that we didn't do a dynamic test of it, sent it to us with no engine. Remember that?
That wouldn't stop us.
It didn't stop us.
I've written first drives on less than that.
We Pete, who was our staff photographer at the time, was it Pete or David? It was Pete. Pete was still with us.
Yeah.
Or Pete had just started, I think. And he had a Nissan X-Trail. So using his X-Trail and a very long tow rope and a Ford Fiesta with no engine, we got photos of it driving around the banking at Rockingham. Much to the annoyance of Ford, because it was the one thing that they thought we couldn't possibly do by removing the engine, because it was going to be a static photo shoot. And we had to phrase it very carefully on the cover, wasn't it? So it's like Fiesta ST150 behind the wheel, because we weren't actually driving it.
There was a guy at Ford at the time called Martin Leach, who was the big boss guy. And he had a phase of saying, because I went to the launch of the Fusion, and he said, we all went, well, it's a bit dull. And he said, well, the reason is, if you look at the Golf, that's a bit dull, but people buy loads of them. And it's like, well, that's Volkswagen. That's different. You need to do something a bit more edgy. And of course, the Fusion was a a bit of a failure everywhere except in Russia, I believe, and they went back to doing interesting designs again.
If you remember, though, Martin Leach a few years later actually tried to buy Vauxhall. So
Not by a Vauxhall, by
no,
Vauxhall.
buy Vauxhall the company. So
He looked like was it Bodie or Doyle from The Professionals? Doyle, I think, wasn't it? Martin Shaw's character. Do you
Yes,
remember
yeah, it
that? He
was.
was the
He
spit
did.
of
He
him.
did. Yeah, it did look exactly like him.
well,
Yeah,
he's sadly no
absolutely.
longer with us, is he? He passed away a couple of years ago.
No, Martin Leach, not Doyle. Yeah.
Yeah, again,
Yeah.
keep it light, Craig. We've got
Sorry.
a no death policy on the clangers generally, apart from cars. Which on that low note, shall we move on to the next clanger?
Well, we'll be going to determine first of all whether the Mark 6 Fiesta.
Well, I did ask that, but everyone changed their mind. So yeah, is it worthy of being in the Clangers Hall of Fame?
I'd quite like a gear one because I like the gear
Okay.
badge. That was a nice gear with that either 1.25 or 1.4 engine in a nice colour. I think would be a suitable clanger.
Okay,
I
Craig.
don't think it's there yet,
Okay.
but these are the cars that people grow up with. And if you look how popular cars like the Vauxhall Corsa B and earlier Fiestas are with younger enthusiasts in particular, while we aren't necessarily going to be inducting it into the Clangers Hall of Fame right now, it probably has its place at some stage in the future.
Okay, so one to revisit is what we're saying on that one. Should we move on to our second clanger?
I think we should, which is definitely a clanger, I think.
Mm.
Just to preempt that question. Yeah.
It's the Mini, not the old one, but the new one. Oh, we say the new one. We're talking 25 years ago. It seems odd to say, doesn't it? But yes, the Mini, the R50, which was the BMW's reboot of the classic Mini. It was a huge fuss at the time, wasn't there? Because it was, the purists hated it. They always said this isn't the Mini. And it was part of that kind of huge revival because Volkswagen had done the Beetle and not done brilliantly out of that, but Mini has sort of outlived that kind of nostalgia feel, hasn't it? And I think it was quite a brave thing for BMW to do in a way because they ignored all the noise that said, oh, Mini has to be a packaging marvel. It has to do this, it has to do that, because A-Class, Smart had come along and they'd been packaging miracles, but hadn't sold particularly well. But they'd just sort of chosen to focus on the style and the personality, hadn't they, with Mini?
It still looks really current, doesn't it? I mean, they did some very subtle updates. I was driving along the A1 the other day, and there were 3 in a row, and one was on the back of a trailer, and then there were 2 drivers with trade plates, and it must be some Mini specialist somewhere. And one was an 04 plate, and one was a 51 plate, and one was a 53 plate. And there were just very subtle differences between them, like little chrome strips and light shapes and where the fog light was, but it's still a very classic shape, but they just very slowly updated it, didn't they? And meant that the old ones still looked good, but the new ones just had a little bit of freshening up. So yeah, it's a really clever design.
The interior was just lovely on that car, wasn't it? And it would kind of set the tone for other manufacturers kind of rebooting stuff and making I don't think if the Mini hadn't been a success, the Fiat wouldn't have decided to try and do the 500, which basically saved Fiat. In fact, they're still paying the bills at Fiat, I think. So yeah, it's really good. And the way they evolved it, I had a Clubman, on the first of the Clubmans, which was this kind of second era after that, wasn't it? After the R50. That was lovely. I really liked that car. It gave me a terrible bad back. I had to sell it. But yeah, I really liked that. And do you remember when we saw the spy shots for Clubman? It appeared to have a door on one side and not on the other. And when we were doing the renderings of it, we thought, well, wait, it won't have one door on one side and not one on the other. That would be idiotic. So every rendering that we saw, we did had those 2 kind of club doors on either side, especially for the UK, because it would have opened onto the wrong side. It opened on the road side, wouldn't it? They would never do that, would they, for a car that's sort of built in Britain? Sure enough, they did. It was only on one side.
It was strange as well because you used to drive it and those rear doors made no sense whatsoever. I mean, it meant, I suppose, you could open it in a small space like in a town or if you'd backed up to a concrete wall in a multi-story car park. But it meant you had to have 2 tiny little wipers with 2 wiper motors, and you couldn't see in the middle when you're driving along because there was a big thick pillar there. So it made no sense, but it was just the classic idea, wasn't it? Which you had to kind of admire in some ways. I also had one, and I bought it secondhand, and I had a look at it, and once I got it home, I was like, "Oh, it's strange. It's kind of got a couple of spots of rust." So then I looked underneath and saw that it was really very rusty indeed, which I wouldn't expect because it wasn't that old at the time. It was like 5 years old. So I did what is one of Craig's favourite tricks, which was to stalk the previous owner using the V5 and looked on Google Street View, and it was on some Scottish island, and the driveway, which clearly showed on Google Street View the car parked there, was next to like a pier. And it basically, you can imagine this kind of howling wind and waves with full of salt water thrashing against this poor Mini for 5 years, and then it getting taken off the island and shipped somewhere and put through an auction, and then eventually ending up with me. So I mark that down to experience of don't buy cars with S at the beginning of the number plate that have come from somewhere in Scotland by the coast.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, it finished my smart off being here. It's 10 years in the Weymouth sea air, and anything that any weak point, it just I mean, cars rust 10 times quicker here. It's not good. Craig, you've still got an old Mini? Have you?
I've got
An
a
old new
I've got
Mini?
one, yeah, because I'm obviously deep in landlocked Cambridgeshire where we don't get much sea air, which means that I have a Y-Reg Mini. I've had two of them. And there's a bit of a cult following for the Y-Reg ones. So these were the very first. And if you get one with OBL on the number plate, it's an ex-BMW Mini press car or marketing car, and there's a separate cult following for those. So there's a Mini Y register. If you've got one, you've got one. The one that I've got now, the two I've had, one was the dealer demonstrator for the Mini dealer in Blackpool. The second one was the blue one, the Mini one that I've still got, was a demo for all electric garages in Birmingham. And those early cars, I think the first one I had was car number 24 and the other one's car number 58. And I think one day that's probably going to be a little bit of a gold mine that I'm sitting on, to be honest. But they are great. They're still brilliant. But the thing a lot of people don't realise about them, they call it the BMW Mini, but the car was developed pretty much entirely at Longbridge before BMW and Rover got divorced. So R50 is a Rover engineering code, for example. All their cars began with R. And right up until just before Rover was sold off, the plan was for the Mini to have the K series engine. So it was always going to have the choice of 1.4, 1.6, and then potentially 1.8 turbo would go into the Cooper S. And then the two companies separated at the 11th hour. R50 was 80, 85, 90% through its development process. There were test cars out on the road. And the separation between BMW and Rover was such an ugly process that Rover said, well, we're not going to supply the engines for it. So BMW had to, at rather short order, get themselves an engine that would fit so that they could launch the car. And they'd already done a huge amount of the development work. So the position of the front drive shafts was fixed, for example. The engine mounts are fixed, for example. And they went shopping through the entire world of the car industry to try and find an off-the-shelf engine that would fit to save them having to develop a new engine from scratch, which would have been a massive and hugely expensive undertaking. It happened with the next generation Mini and the 1.5 engine that they now have. But for those first cars, they had to find something that fit. And the one engine they found was a four-cylinder 1.6 litre engine that was used by Chrysler in South America called the Tritec engine. And the dimensions were almost identical. So someone from BMW phoned up Chrysler and said, oh yeah, we'd like to place an order for 500,000 Tritec engines, please. And someone at Chrysler went, what? And then that's how it came about. So the BMW Mini was launched with a Chrysler engine. The only time I believe that BMW and Chrysler have ever collaborated. There's probably somebody who's even more geeky than I am who can tell me that's not true. And for the first generation of Mini sales, Chrysler was basically given a blank check every time that BMW needed some new engines for the Mini. And I guess it would never have had that Chrysler engine otherwise.
It had the noisiest power steering pump in the world, didn't it? That car?
It was one of the first cars to have electric power steering, which I believe was an adaptation of the electric power steering system used on the MGF. but because of where it was mounted, like in the MGF, it was mounted halfway down the car.
Yeah.
Whereas in the Mini, the steering rack was much further forward. So if you were standing outside the car, you could hear it whirring and whining every time you parked it.
Yeah, it sounded it sounded like it was on its last knockings every time.
The personalization was something they really, because I think they'd learnt about this from the old classic Mini, the end of that people would spend an absolute fortune on things like spotlights and
Mm.
having the Union Jack on the roof. So they did that really well, didn't they, with the new Mini? And
Yeah.
it kind of became a thing for everyone else then. So you could have a white roof. It was very rare that you saw one that wasn't personalized. And now if I see one that's got steel wheels with those nice plastic hubcaps on and in one color, like a base color or something, uh, without fancy mirrors or anything, I think it stands out as being unusual because it doesn't have 17-inch alloys or things. But I think talking of colours, Mike, didn't you have some influence in the Mini colour palette?
Well, yeah, I think there's a chance that I may have invented a new color for Mini, which they ended up using. Is that when we were on Auto Express, we made Mini Car of the Year, which was slightly controversial because it didn't win any category. It wasn't good enough to win any category because it was a slightly odd thing, wasn't it? But we made it Car of the Year. So for the photo shoot for the cover, the art department wanted to do a car leaping in the air. Mini sent us a car with the unwritten understanding that you don't go jumping this car because it's the only one we've got. So they wanted this jump shot of the car, and they sent us a red one. We couldn't jump it, so we had to fake it. We had to put it on axle stands at a slight angle so it looked as if it was coming. We did it at Chopham, at the top of the tank ramps there, and obviously painted out the axle stands. But the red car didn't really work in terms of the design of the page and everything. So we had big red type saying Car of the Year, and with a red car as well, it kind of jumped. So I think it was me that photoshopped it gold. So it ended up being gold on the cover as a kind of the winning the gold, that kind of connection. And later on, we sort of found that BMW looked at this and thought, actually, it looks quite good in gold. And my understanding is gold wasn't part of the original color palette that the car was sold with, but it subsequently became available. So we've sort of slightly put two and two together and thought perhaps they looked at that and thought, yes, you know what, it works pretty well. So yeah, we may have invented a color. We may have added a color to the palette.
I love the effort that went into creating that shot now, because today you just take a 3/4 front photograph of the car and do it all on Lightbox in about 20 minutes, wouldn't you?
I know it was very manual in those days. There was no, there was no AI. It was very much very manual. I had to buy 2 sets of axle stands, and it's quite hard getting a car onto 2 sets of axle stands, isn't it? You can lift a car with a trolley jack pretty easily. As soon as you start doing the front and the rear of it, everything goes out of balance. The front set of axle stands start to lean slightly. So you think, God, I don't want it to fall off and puncture through the floor of this. It's a horrible thing to do.
Well, we should probably start to think about wrapping this up, but we do need to decide what we're going to talk about next week.
We do.
Now, I have a suggestion.
Okay.
Staying with small cars again, if that's all right with you. And I quite like the kind of the prestige feel of the Mini, because I think that's got more clanger potential if you're having a small prestige car, but a little more perhaps innovative. So how about Mercedes A-Class and Audi A2? Two seeming competitors that went about it in a very different way.
Yeah.
Does that sound good?
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. I mean, they're both kind of glorious failures as well, which, we like to sort of celebrate here on Clangers, isn't it? Aren't they? They're just kind of, they were so ahead of their time, and yet I don't think either of them made a dime for their manufacturer. So yeah, I think definitely good ones to discuss next week.
And I think you've had an Audi A2, Mike, haven't you? And Craig,
I've owned both actually.
Oh,
so,
excellent.
Yeah, so this is a rare, very rare Clang. I mean, that's not surprising that you've owned them, Craig, but yeah, for me to have owned two.
I've owned them at a sort of slightly more end of life stage than you have, though, Mike. My A2, which is still around the back of my workshop, actually, it's got 250,000 miles on the clock. But we'll talk about that next time.
Yes. Don't ruin it.
Okay, I think we should wrap up now. Please, if you're listening to this on a podcast platform, please subscribe and leave us a review. If you can be bothered, it's always nice to get them and find out what you're thinking about the pod. You can also find us on Instagram at Clangers Pod, where you can message us and we put up clips and let you know when the new episodes go live. So I think that's up from us. See you next week.
See you next week.
See you.